So, as we wrap up this edition of the State of Recruiting podcast, it won't be as analytical as the other three we've talked about today, but we've got to update the latest on Jaden Rashada. So, this show was centered around the top unsigned players. Technically, the quarterback out of Pittsburgh, California, has signed with the Florida Gators. He did so in December. But if you've been up to date, you have seen this week reports have been sourced and since confirmed that Jaden Rashada and his camp have asked out of that national letter of intent for the University of Florida. So, in essence, assuming the Gators grant the wish of backing out of that letter of intent, Jaden Rashada becomes not only the last elite quarterback on the market, but the biggest elite quarterback down the final stretch of the recruiting process. So let's start with the timeline here. Jaden Rashada, again, Pittsburgh, California, Elite 11 finalist, top 10 prospect for us at SI back when we ranked the class of 2023. 6'4", about 190 pounds, great arm, smooth mechanics, very much a push the ball down the field, modern pocket quarterback who's got enough mobility and athleticism to keep defenses honest as a passer and occasional runner there outside the pocket. Huge offer list coming out of his junior season at Pittsburgh, really his first full campaign as the starter there. And the offer list went crazy. A couple dozen schools jumped in, and it became apparent in the spring of 2022 that this was going to be a national recruitment, right? Ole Miss, Miami, Texas A&M, Oregon, of course, Florida, Cal, BYU, Washington, all schools trying to make a play for Jaden Rashada. Took the official visits in the offseason, and it became apparent midsummer that this was going to be a Sunshine State battle. All the buzz was with Florida with a sprinkle of Miami. Ahead of a June commitment date, he pushes it back, finds a way to get down to Miami for a visit, and all of a sudden, it feels like a coin flip going into that summer decision between the Hurricanes and the Gators. Rashada opts for Miami and stays committed to the U through, I believe, November, to where the rumors started to pick up about a flip to the Florida Gators. That, of course, eventually does happen. He flips from Miami to Florida, and in December, with a sprinkle of drama, signs with Florida at the end of the day on December 21st. And I want to go back to that date. So across my desk, covering signing day like a madman, running around computer to computer, text to tablet to laptop, whatever it is, we go and find out maybe Jaden Rashada doesn't sign the 21st. And as far as what I was told by some reliable sources, it was about some agreements that had been agreed upon and the details within them. There was some back and forth on some of the fine print, if you will, relative to said deal. And at one point, it was apparent that Jaden was not going to sign on December 21st. However, the Florida side, as far as I understand it, changed their stance, updated some things, and Rashada ends up signing with Florida, I believe, in the early evening hours, East Coast, of December 21st. And at that point, you feel like, is it over? Is this the end of the Jaden Rashada saga? Of course, since that point, we have come to understand that it was not the end. And basically, 10 days ago or so, came across my desk one more time. Hey, there's some fine print that was agreed upon by both sides of the coin that now the Florida side of the coin does not feel as comfortable with. It wasn't about specifics or even Jaden himself. It was about, to my understanding, some of the adults in the room and some of the circumstances that they had agreed upon and pushed for back in December. And even early on in November, ahead of the flip from Miami to Florida. And after that point, there was more dialogue of, can this get corrected, or can one side back off of an already agreed upon and signed agreement, right? So you understand from a legal standpoint why some folks in the Rashada camp didn't budge. Hey, you agreed to this. It's signed by me. It's signed by you. It's signed by him. It's signed by her. It's signed by everybody. This is what was agreed upon. Hold your end of the situation. Again, as far as I understand it, I want to put that caveat out there. As far as I understand it, at that point, Florida was back and forth on a specific element of the deal. Eventually, it was going to become clear to Rashada's camp and counsel that it was not going to be met from the Florida perspective, to which Jaden was advised to not enroll at Florida. That's why this drama popped up in the last 10 days, because last week, Jaden was on the cusp of enrolling or not enrolling during that ad drop deadline. I believe it was Friday, the 13th of January, ironically enough. That was the day where we were going to basically find out the true fate, even though reports had surfaced of Rashada not enrolling and or asking out of this letter of intent. We were going to find out the true decision from him and his camp. Most importantly, his camp, as far as I understand it. Friday comes and goes, no enrollment. So you know the next step naturally is going to be asking out of that letter of intent, which brought us back to this week. And that's where we are in the timeline. Rashada has asked out of that letter of intent. So the only clear data we have today is that the deal was bad. Both sides agreed upon it, and it changed thereafter. He was advised not to enroll, which he followed, and now he's asking out of that letter of intent. So it brings us to this point, and I'm not here to bash any part of this, although the adults need to accept more responsibility surrounding these kids, which is true for Jaden Rashada and everybody else among high-level recruits. I mean, it's just become crazy with the folks involved with these teenagers, how much they're trying to pull out of some of these situations, whether it's NIL or otherwise. It's an embarrassment. But again, adults taking advantage of kids financially, status-wise, all of that has been a thing forever, and it will unfortunately continue to be a thing in college football recruiting. I digress. The big question now is, where in the world is Jaden going? And I think that's where, we need to be clear and concise here. Naturally, the first thought was, well, does Miami circle back and see if he wants to flip once more from Miami to Florida, then Florida to Miami? It's one that you could understand both sides of the argument. On the yes side of the argument, Miami is in need of talent. Jaden Rashada is one of the more talented quarterbacks available. And of late, backup quarterback Jake Garcia has entered the portal. So you understand the need for bodies. There are 3 scholarship quarterbacks as we record this at the University of Miami: Tyler Van Dyke, Ja'Cory Brown, and true freshman Emory Williams, who just enrolled this month. Rashada would theoretically be the 4th piece to that puzzle. And obviously there's familiarity between Mario Cristobal's staff and the Rashada camp, dating back to the Oregon days of Cristobal. However, on the other side of the coin, just like we talked about earlier with Brian, at what point do you move on? At what point do you say, we are bowing out of this recruitment independent of what happens? That could have already happened and taken place for Miami. And secondarily, they've had some staff turnover. Not only are there rumors about offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis maybe not ending up at the U in 2023, but quarterbacks coach Frank Ponce has already made a move back to Appalachian State, where he will be the play caller in 23 like he was before the 2022 season. So we've already seen some turnover on the Miami side. So if you remove Miami from this conversation of where Jaden Rashada may go, it's about the Pac-12 schools. It's about getting back into that footprint. One, don't count out Deion Sanders, because look, available talent late in the game, Deion's going to make a run. It just is what it is at this point. But outside of that bubble, we've seen turnover in the quarterback rooms at a lot of these programs. Cal is looking for talent. Rashada is semi-local to Cal, very familiar with that program. That's one that absolutely could be back in the conversation and maybe would be the most likely destination if Rashada is to head back to the Pac-12. What about Washington? They were in the mix at one point. They lost their quarterback recruit, Lincoln Keenholz, who flipped to Ohio State right before National Signing Day. Perhaps Washington, combined with that and the fact that Sam Heward has hit the portal, the backup quarterback to Michael Penix, they are absolutely in the market for another quarterback. What about other programs in that footprint? Could Arizona State get involved? Remember, Oregon was in the mix for Rashada. Kenny Dillingham was the OC at Oregon. He is now the head coach at Arizona State. They need bodies in the quarterback room as well, even though Drew Pine from Notre Dame has transferred in. But in terms of development in the future, they need talent at the quarterback position. So don't rule out the Arizona State Sun Devils. And that's where I kind of want to wrap up here. The conventional thought is that Miami's ship could have sailed either from the Rashada side or the Miami side. So it's most likely he ends up back in his native Pac-12 footprint. But it's about where. Washington might need him the most, but you would understand Cal, Arizona State, Oregon even getting back in the conversation. All of those avenues, Colorado, of course, would make some sense. So good for Jaden Rashada in the fact that he's probably going to have multiple options after this fiasco and the dust around it settles. Been around Jaden, talked to Jaden a bunch. This ain't on him. It's going to profile that way, and he'll unfortunately carry it with his name. But based on everything I'm hearing as a journalist, as a college football fan, and someone immersed in the middle of the recruiting craziness in this cycle, this ain't on Jaden. I wanted that on the record, and that is how we will wrap up today's edition of the State of Recruiting. Thank you for sticking in this long. It's going to be a heck of a finish ahead of National Signing Day, and we'll have every element of it covered for you right here on College Football Nation. I want to thank Brian Driscoll for stopping by. Want to have him on the show as much as possible. His knowledge, evaluation skill, elite, unparalleled in our industry. We will utilize that as much as humanly possible. Until next time, thanks for listening, everybody. Subscribe, like, rate, share, all of those things. God bless. Garcia out.